Who knows what Jay-Z, J.K. Rowling, Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey all have in common? Okay, I will tell you then. They have all overcome failure in one shape or form to go on to gain success in their respective careers. Welcome to My Perfect Failure. Join us as we delve into the world of our perfect failures. We will interview, explore, and discuss how our perfect failures can lead us to success. Join us and tune in.
Welcome everybody to another episode of My Perfect Failure. Today I'm super excited because I have another amazing guest for you today. So my guest today is an author and writing mentor who founded the Inspired Writer community, a women's writers network for writers at any stage in their writing lives. Her best-selling book, The Writer's Roadmap, Paving the Way to Your Ideal Writing Life, helps thousands find their way in the writing world. She writes for the Washington Post, Wired, and Insider, among others. She lives in the mountains of Argentina with her family. So a very, 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 very warm welcome to My Perfect Failure, Leigh Shulman. How are you?
Very good, Paul. Thank you. It's great to be here. And after our last conversation, I'm excited.
Yeah,
I'm excited
likewise.
to continue.
Yes, to come up like a continuation.
Exactly.
Maybe like another chapter. Maybe the first conversation was like the preface or the introduction, and now this may be our chapter one. So yeah, so I'm just
Exactly.
using those writer analogies because I guess that's what we're going to be covering in some detail today. So yeah, but excited to have this conversation with you, and I meet a lot of people in real life or virtually that writing is a big part of their lives, and they're all at different stages of their journey. But I think that there's one thing that I think generally they have in common is that it always feels to me listening that yeah there's a huge satisfaction, but there's a lot of work involved, and everybody will have their ups and downs in that journey. So when we connected, I was drawn to what you do, how you support your community, how you support your members, and you'll probably recognize a lot of the challenges that people, particularly writers, have. So yeah, so I'm excited for our conversation today. But where I was keen to start, if I may, is invariably at the beginning. So for you, you're US based. No, sorry, you're from the US, but you're not based there.
My family lives in the US. I'm not technically from there. I've moved around a lot, but now
Okay.
I live here in Argentina. It's one of those things that it's just easier to say from the US and live here because the story is too long
Okay.
otherwise.
Okay. That's another podcast, probably. That's probably you probably
Right.
did tell me some of this when we spoke previously. But if we can focus a little bit on the US, because I researched this about you.
Sure.
So New York based. Well, so were you based in New York and then you decided I'm going to move to somewhere else and ended up in Argentina?
Yeah, well, I lived in New York. I went to college there, university there, and then I guess ended up staying for about 15 years.
Mm,
Went to grad school, got married, had a child. So my life was very much, New York City, and then we moved out, well, Manhattan, and then we moved out to Brooklyn. And then at a certain point, it just became too much,
mm,
particularly with like a 2-year-old.
yeah.
And it just wasn't fun living there. It was so much hard work, just going shopping felt like too much and too many unspoken rules. And we just decided, no, we're done.
Mm,
We sold everything and just traveled. And with the idea that we didn't know yet where we wanted to go, but that we knew we wanted something different.
mm. That's interesting, actually, that I admire your ability to kind of like spot the dots, pick through where the bottlenecks are, then make a decision. Because I think in life, many of us have these kind of feelings, and the life doesn't quite fit. Maybe some of us don't work it out, maybe some of us do, but then you've got this smallish bucket of people like yourself that I think actually I recognize it now. kind of like let's change it. So, so you moved to Argentina. Was that your first port of call, or did that come later in the journey?
No, we left, we actually, we really were looking around, and a lot of it was based on where we decided to go was based on where people gave us places to stay or
Yeah.
ideas of things to do. So
Mm.
the first thing we did is we went to Europe. We flew into France in Europe. Well, we flew through Iceland into Europe because a friend of ours had a house there, and he's like, "Oh, come and stay." He's one of those people. He's a designer, and he has like,
Yeah.
I have a little house everywhere, and they're huge and they're
Mm.
gorgeous. So we stayed with him in the south of France for a little while, traveled around there, stayed as long as we could on a tourist visa. I went back to the States, stayed there for a while, and then had a family member who married somebody from Panama, and she invited us to come there. So we went to Panama, and I was hoping that Panama would be it, that that's where we would love to be. And it just really wasn't for us.
Mm.
The big cities were sort of, you don't live in New York City and then move to Panama City. That's not, if you don't want to be in the city, if you leave a city because it's too
Yeah.
busy,
Yeah.
Panama City isn't the place to go,
Yeah.
because you don't have all the benefits of New York City, but it's still a big city. And then when we actually lived on a small island in Bocas del Toro. There's an archipelago called Bocas del Toro in the Caribbean. And we stayed there for about 4 months. But it was basically when my husband Noah, he had an injury, a scuba diving injury. He cut his foot on coral, so not a terrible
Okay.
injury, but ended up having to fly back to Panama City, and spend time in the hospital because of it. And we realized that was a little scary with having a small child, that if there was a major accident, we couldn't fly anywhere
Yeah.
quickly. There was a way to get healthcare. And my other issue was Panama was water.
Yeah.
You had to buy all your water or drink water that was basically, you have a stomachache all the time. And living there made me sort of realize issues with water, like firsthand, the issues with water in our world, and who has clean water and who
Mm.
doesn't.
Yeah.
And as strange as this may sound, one of the guidelines of where I wanted to live, I wanted to be able to live somewhere where we could drink the tap water. So it's not just us,
Mm.
and that you have to be privileged and have extra money to be able to drink clean water. I
Mm.
wanted to live in a place
Yeah.
where people around me had that benefit too. So
Yeah.
yeah, Panama, it was beautiful but scary. Like it had its edge.
As it challenges.
So yeah.
I guess we can do some research and stuff, but you only really get to really understand whether a country or a place is for you when we actually go there, because somebody can go on a holiday, or they may give us their own appraisal of a place, and they may like it or dislike it. And when we go, we might think, well, actually, I wonder why they didn't like it or why they liked it, because our experience is totally different. So I think we definitely have to engage the environment, the place, and then we can make our own decision. And I do get your point about the importance of water, because there's so many things that in a Western culture that we take for granted, and we don't necessarily appreciate how important it is until we live in an environment where actually that isn't the norm. Actually having clean water on a daily basis, every second you can get up in UK, America, and numerous other countries, and water is just there in abundance. And for other people, it's a
Definitely.
total luxury. So yeah. And as you were talking, I was thinking about languages. So you kind of looked at different countries. You mentioned France, and was language ever a barrier in terms of your decision, or were you quite prepared to kind of learn wherever you felt there was a kind of like an easy fit with you and your family?
Language was actually one of the reasons we wanted to move somewhere where we didn't know the language, because it put us in a position where we had to learn it.
Oh, really?
And it was sort of this, like, we really love travel, and living living as an expat is kind of like travel, but you live there. So
Mm.
you never, like, we don't have to deal with our kids go to school, and we have work, but that excitement of not knowing,
Yeah.
even 15 years later, that still happens where I see things here and I'm like, wow, that would never have happened in New York. And learning a new language, you know, I had tried to learn Spanish in New York, and there's so many Spanish speakers in New York, but when it's so easy to just fall into English because that's what everybody speaks, it wasn't the main reason for leaving and for all of this, but it was a nice benefit to learn a new language. And Spanish and also French, like I'd taken French in high school and college, so I did speak a little bit. I spoke more French than I spoke Spanish, but there's also a big difference between, you know, college or high school language classes and actually showing up in a country and needing to speak to people. Very, very different, you know, and even we had lived in Panama for 6 months and I thought I knew a decent amount of Spanish. Then we got to Argentina, different words, different pronunciation, and it was starting over. But learning how to speak a language, particularly in my experience in Spanish speaking countries, is a lot of fun, and people are really fun and open, and they're okay with your mistakes and things. Like I would say to people some very basic Spanish, and I didn't speak Spanish at the time, and they would, you know, you speak Spanish so well, it's so great, and so it makes you want to learn. So it was the opposite of a barrier to travel. I think if we'd moved to a place like Thailand, or, you know, a place where I had no basis in the language, that might have been different.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'd like to try it.
Yeah, no. Well, I do like and admire the way that you approached it, in that when you decided, actually, let's look at a different place, language was there, but you didn't view it as a barrier. Almost, it was almost an added bonus, where if we decided to stay in France or somewhere Spanish speaking, we would gain another language, and kind of, you didn't put pressure on yourself. You're like, well, clearly we're not going to nail it immediately. There's a process, and I admire that, because a lot of people, we put too much pressure on ourselves to be perfect kind of instantly. And it probably, we're going to get into the writing as well, but maybe there's some synergy there, because writing, I imagine that we can't be perfect initially. But I just want to ask Labour on one more point, then I'm keen to get into how writing became so significant in your life, just because I'm nosy and interested in this sort of transition. So you decided to move, and the next thing that comes to my mind is around the kind of just the whole adapting to a different infrastructure, a different way of life, a different culture, a different working system. Was that something that you took the same viewpoint, that is something that we're getting used to, we won't put a massive pressure on us? Or did you do some research beforehand in relation to that?
We did not do research, and I don't actually recommend that. I don't recommend just showing up in a country knowing nothing about it and being like, I'm living here. But we didn't know if we were going to live in the places we landed. So really we were there it was more like a vacation, and then to see, hey, do you want to stay? So it started off more vacation-like, and then we would decide. And we came to Salta, which is where I live. It's in the northwest of Argentina. We came here because for the same reasons we went to most places. A professor of Noah's had a conference here. He's a fascinating person. He studies poisonous snakes. That's a specialty. And we had gone to Brazil with him years earlier. And so we asked him when we started traveling, hey, do you know anything that's going on in South America? Because we were thinking we were going to go to Uruguay, and we were asking him for Uruguay. And he's like, well, actually, Argentina, but it's on the other side of the country. Got here, and you know, he introduced us to a few people who helped us find a school for our daughter. And he kind of helped us out in certain ways. So we had that basis, and his friends helped us out too. So just having those connections was really, really useful. Getting used to living here takes time. I mean, it takes, you know, we joke there's the 1 year expat, there's the 5 year expat, the 15 year, and then there's the 30 year expat. And most people don't really last more than 10 years. Not because something went wrong, but more like most people I know here, they came here just to spend a little bit of time. They never expected to stay as long as they
Okay.
did, but now it's time to go home. We never had that feeling, but they talk about, the expat honeymoon phase where the first 18 months you love it, and then and everything is perfect and you kind of see it with rose-colored glasses. And then you hit around 18 months, 2 years, and you just hate everything and everyone, and it just grates at you. And I guess in a sense, Noah and I never hit that phase at the same time. So one of us always wanted to stay. And now I think for me, the Trump presidency in the United States and also the pandemic changed because of what we all experienced during the pandemic. It shaped who we are to a large extent.
Yeah.
And when I go back to the United States now, it's a different place. And I'm more comfortable here than I am there. And I feel like the Trump presidency had a lot to do with that too, because they happened at the same time, there was a long period of time where we couldn't go back. I think it was about maybe 2 years where we didn't go back to the States at all. And in that two-year period, there was so much more division in the United States politically, and just the laid backness of Argentina. I'd become so accustomed to that trying to integrate into the United States felt so uncomfortable. And just the way of life, and you're talking about, how we try to be perfect. The United States is so intense, and I grew up there. I never felt that way when I was there. Even living in New York, I knew New York was intense, but just now when I go back and see it, I don't get it anymore. I don't understand it, and I even think to myself, like, how do you live with so much stress and so many rules? Because I don't have that here. I have other stuff and other things that go on, but I'm more comfortable with them now. So you sort of shift from one to the other. We change.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? When we take ourselves out of a situation, we can, and we go back into it, particularly if we've been out of it for a while, we can look at the current situation or how we existed before with a different lens, and we're able to be more, I guess we have a better perspective about actually either it is for me or it definitely isn't, or it's changed, and it can reaffirm a decision either to we made a good decision, or if we went back and things had changed and improved, actually maybe there's another decision that we can consider. But yeah, so I guess what we're here today to discuss is writing and the challenges that any potential person that's going to engage in writing is going to face. So writing for you and reading, when did it become a feature in your life?
Honestly, as long as I could read and write, it was a feature in my life. And I was lucky because I had a lot of really solid mentors.
Yeah.
I remember the librarian, I think when I was in something like second grade or younger, I remember her bringing to me, A Wrinkle in Time and the Madeline L'Engle books and saying, like, I think you're going to like this. And then that feeling of, oh my God, I fell in love with an author and just wanted to read everything of hers. So reading has always been a part of my life. I've always wanted to read. I've always had favorite books, like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I read that book so many times when I was a kid. And when we moved, and we didn't keep that many things as we moved, but I still have my original copy with the piece that's falling apart. And, and writing, I think for me, writing really became something functional in my life when I was maybe 12 or 13. And it was a really good way of just getting out emotions. My family isn't the most emotional family. We don't deal with emotions. It's like everything's fine, everything's fine. We don't deal with those things. So for me, it was a great place to just put things and to say things. And then as I got older, when I was in, more like high school, sort of early high school and through the end, like the school paper or yearbook, and I would just write things and people loved them. And that was my first experience of, oh, you can write and then people read it and you can have interaction with an audience. And I And that just blew my mind. And that's what made me want to be like, oh, I always want to do this. Can you do that? And I had no idea you could do it for a living. It took a long time before I realized that. But I will say also, my first experiences with that feeling were wonderful. And I felt like, oh, I can do this, and you can write, and you can do this. And I think what happens for most writers is that eventually, you hit a point where somebody blocks you.
Yeah.
Somebody blocks you, or you do it to yourself, where you are trying to be, I don't know, too much, too perfect, too big. Like the first question that people usually ask writers, have I read anything you've written? Well, that's a lot of pressure. And like, I mean, and people do say that to high schoolers and 12-year-olds too. They think it's funny because that's what you say, because that's how you're not a writer until you've published a book and are as famous as Stephen King. And that is a very, very high bar to reach. If every writer was like Stephen King, I mean, it's ludicrous to even think of it that way. There's so many different ways of writing and putting it out there, and you have to make decisions for what's important to you when you're writing. What's the central of it? What's the center of it? And how do you want to play that out? What do you want to share with audiences? What feels right? People talk a lot about personal essays. Personal essay is something I don't write anymore. And at this point in my life, I have no intention of writing a memoir, but people they want to tell their stories. And I am 100% for telling your story. The reason I tell my story through other things. If I'm writing fiction, my story is in there in little pieces. You may not know how, but it's there. If I write an article for Wired, I include my experiences, but the bigger picture is about something else. But I've chosen, I don't want to share the sort of hard details of my life with everybody. Not because I don't want everyone to know. Some things I don't want people to know. But I have kids, I have a family. My husband doesn't really feel right about that. And my life is connected to his and to my kids. Therefore, I don't want to share their stories because they don't want them shared. And so I guess also just sort of taking a step back, there's so many personal choices that you make when it comes to choosing a writing life, that the idea that we're all going to be Stephen King is way too much pressure, and it doesn't even make sense because not everybody writes like Stephen King.
Yeah. Just in relation to that, I think it touches on that point. So obviously in any field, you've got people that from a perception perspective may have hit the higher notes, whether it be acting in sport, authorship. So with regards to writers, is it important that we choose writing for the right reasons and not decide we want to be a writer because we've got this really ambitious goal of being a best-selling author, which is, to your point earlier, there's a huge amount of pressure there, huge amount of expectation, and the chances of somebody creating a masterpiece like that is pretty remote.
It's interesting. Like for me, and this is very central to the book that I wrote, the writer's roadmap and creating your roadmap. So something like, I want to be a bestseller and sell this many copies. In the way I envision roadmaps for writers, that's not a goal. That's a measure.
Okay.
It measures the goal. I want to write books. I want people to read my books. I want to connect with my audience. I want to share a message. Those are goals. And those are all based on, well, what is the life I want to live? How do I want to show up in this world for people? And I think for most of us, enjoying life and feeling authentic in the choices that we're making, enjoying where we are, enjoying what we're doing, and not feeling pressured, is pretty central to what we want. But so many people don't actually include that in their goals. So I think I would never say to someone, oh, don't try to be a bestseller. No. You want to be a bestseller, include that and push toward that. But that's letting you know, okay, I want to write this book and I want to share my message with 1 million people. Oh, great. 1 million people, the measure of sharing the message, of putting yourself out there and telling a story that resonates with people. Because it's a lot hard, like becoming a bestseller and selling X many books and this many people reading your work. The bottom line is that's not actually fulfilling in and of itself. Because what if you write a book that you're not interested in, you don't really like, somebody told you to write it and it makes, you know, a huge amount of money. Is that actually meeting what you want? Is that really getting you where you want to go? Maybe if making money and that money allows you freedoms that you wouldn't have without it, fantastic. But it's still the measure. It's not the actual goal.
Yeah.
The goal would still be, I want to travel. I want to see the world. I want to be able to be comfortable wherever I am. I want to be able to do all the things that I need to do to take care of myself. And if that means flying first class and buying a $10,000 ticket in order to go to the other side of the world, so I'm not cramped in, you know, in coach, excellent. But it's not the money that's the goal. And at least that's how I look at it, because money and followers and are all outside of ourselves. And I mean, you read about that all the time. You know, there's people, you know, those things are not what fulfill our lives. They're tools to fulfill our lives and to potentially work toward as part of a bigger picture. But they're certainly not, for me, they're not goals in and of themselves, because for me, that's pretty empty. It's the connection that I have with people that for me works better.
Okay. So when you say the connection that you have with people, is the connection that you want to have with people, or you feel that your book can have with people, with your audience, is that kind of like one of the central drivers that inspires you to put pen to paper and maybe to use your imagination and create what you're going to create?
Absolutely. Everything I write is about either connecting with another person to say, hey, yeah, I get it. This thing exists. And you have people who, you know, to find the people who see the world similarly or need support that I maybe needed when I was, you know, I'm writing a YA novel right now. And one of the central things to all the fiction that I write and all the kidlit, they call it. I mean, young adult, for me, they're not kids, and calling people kids is weird, but that's the genre. But you know, whether it's young adult or middle grade, the central part of it for me, the central message is, you know, you can be whatever you want to be. Or that's the one book, you can be whatever you want to be. My other young adult book is, you're always going to have pressure on yourself to do certain things. You need to know what you want, and you have to choose yourself over your community or over what people tell you to do. And I feel like, you know, a lot of us, children, adolescents, adults, I think we live in a world where so many rules are placed on us, and rules that are sometimes social, that are legal, that are, you know, just the environment that we're in, that people don't always ask us in a meaningful way, what is it that you actually want? And then if what you want isn't what they think you should want, then that becomes a whole other thing. It's like, well, what if I'm perfectly fine moving to another country and living in a place where I can't get groceries delivered? You know, and that's a silly way of saying it, because I think most people would give up having their groceries delivered in order to live in, you know, what in their most perfect place. But sometimes it comes down to that. Like when I go back to the States, you know, I'm fully aware of how much we don't have in Argentina. Of course, now, if you ask me what those things are, because I couldn't tell you what they are now, because I'm home and I'm relaxed and I'm happy where I am, and it's summer and the kids are in the pool all the time. And it's the life that, you know, it's the life that I'm happy that I've created for my children and myself and my family. Whereas when I'm there and it's like, oh, well, I mean, we go, you know, we don't have dollar stores, and I can't even think of what they are now, but when I'm in the States, I am painfully aware of what they are. There's no Target here. There's no, I don't know. There's no, I mean, we can get delivery now, but the food's not great. Like there's not the same the same number of restaurants. You don't have the same number of museums, which I would like museums, but for me living here, the peace that I have in my life is far more important than all the things I can see and the stuff that I can get when in the US.
Yeah. That kind of makes sense, because I think sometimes we can live with that scarcity mindset where we just think about what we don't have, what we lack, as opposed to actually, I don't have that, but I've got all this stuff. I've got this amazing climate. I've got maybe a lovely natural background environment around me, the weather, the climate. So there's lots of pluses, and sometimes we can definitely exist in that sort of lack, scarcity mindset.
Exactly.
I was keen to ask you around. So very occasionally, I'm not an author, and I barely put a pen to paper, but every now and again, I kind of think to myself randomly, a book idea comes into my head. I think actually that's so invariably it appears like a title, and I'll think actually there's loads of potential with that. Definitely, that's something I should look at and do. And then sometimes I might get to the point where I put it into a doc where I've got like book titled ideas, but I never do it with any real conviction in terms of there's going to be any follow through, because pretty soon afterwards I will potentially think, oh, it's impossible. How can I, the idea of sitting down, putting pen to paper, and then crafting something is pretty gigantic for me, pretty overwhelming. So it probably will lean into your book a little bit now with this question, but is that something that you've heard before from particularly people at the beginning of their writing journey?
Absolutely. And not just at the beginning, throughout the whole process.
Really?
I mean, I'll say to people at this point, I've written enough books, I've done enough things that I know if I want to finish something, I'm going to finish it. And I have a process and I have a way of doing it. And a lot of what I do in my community or when I work one-on-one with people is helping them find that process, but also getting used to the idea that it's okay not to know. It's okay not to have all the pieces in place. I mean, I've met with people to talk, they have a book idea and they want to flesh it out and they want to see if they're going to write it. And they'll often apologize to me. I'll ask them questions about the book. Oh, I don't know. Oh, I'm sorry. You're not supposed to know. You're not supposed to know at the beginning. When I love the fact that you have a title, though. Do you know of any? Can you remember any of them offhand by any chance?
Not offhand, but I can email them to you after. But so just they invariably they sit around the narrative of the podcast. So it'd be something around this, because it's what I think about a lot, and I have lots of wonderful conversations with people like yourself. And yeah, and tell you when it invariably happens. It invariably happens because I listen to podcasts as well. I listen to audio books. I might read something, and then there might be something that I listen to or I read, and something grabs me, and then this rush comes to me in terms of there's potential there, and then if I've got a pen and paper or my phone, I will just put it into. I might actually have something in. I'll let you talk, and if I can find something in my phone,
okay. Got it. Well, and I would say, okay, so my first question is, do you want to write a book? You know, because a lot of people don't. Although I guess my underlying feeling is most people actually do want to write a book. They just don't think they can. And it was when you said it feels impossible that I was like, oh, okay. Then it's about a little bit at a time. It's really, writing a book is like any big process. It's like picking up and selling everything and moving to another place. It's like getting used to living in a new place. All of them are a constant process of one little step at a time. You just need to know what your next step is going to be. You can create a bigger picture of what you think it might be or what you would like it to be, but that might change, particularly when you're in the beginning of writing the book. And then having patience while you kind of try things out and recognizing you're not going to know everything. You don't have to know everything. And quite frankly, that space of not knowing is the creative space. And allowing like all these ideas to come out, and people will be like, oh, I'm babbling. Like people say that to me all the time when we talk, oh, I'm just babbling. It's so many ideas. That's a good thing. It's a great thing to have a lot of ideas. you know, your final book won't have all of those ideas in it, most likely, or maybe they'll present themselves in very different ways. But at the beginning, that idea of let it come out, let it be babbled, let it just on the page. I don't like it when people call it vomit, because it's not vomit. It's creativity. And, you know, just imagine just that all can come out. And the other thing I find that people do is they don't write it down. They leave it in their heads for a long period of time. So it's great that you're putting it down. And I bet you have, like all writers have, ideas all over the place. And then you can kind of maybe take a look at them and see, oh, I wrote this here. Maybe you hand wrote in your journal. Maybe you typed it here, or maybe it's on your phone. Just take a look at it and see what's there. Because it's that process. I talk about it like they're two different languages. So it's interesting that you brought up the connection between learning a new language and writing, because the ideas that are in your head and writing them down is a translation process. And for me, it's very similar to trying to, okay, I have this thing in my head that's in English, and now I want to say it in this language that I don't really know. I only know little pieces of it. All right, well, use the pieces you know, put the piece out there, put it down. Is it going to be perfect? Is it going to be like the most fascinating thing that's ever been written? Maybe, but probably not. And I always leave room for that maybe, possibly, because I don't know if you've ever spoken to somebody who, I mean, I'm sure you have, who English isn't their first language. And sometimes when they'll talk, they'll say things that you're like, wow, that is so beautifully poetic. I was with a friend of mine who's Israeli years ago, and he had some little like hand game that he was playing. It was like a juggly thing. I don't even know what it's called. And he was trying to teach me how to use it. And I couldn't get it. The things kept falling onto the ground. And finally he says to me, he's like, you know, your problem is you're using too much power. And I was like, wow, if that's not a tagline for my life and my personal obstacles in life, and he didn't mean it that way, and that's not what he said, but in the bigger picture, that kind of is who he is, and that is the kind of things that he would say, and that is how he lives his life. So, you know, those little translation errors, whether it's a translation error of what was in your head to write your book, to get that down on paper, it may not be exactly what you picture, but it will be something. And to just have patience with to allow that to happen, and to allow it to be ugly and messy, because without the ugly and messy, you cut out your creativity.
Can I ask you a question just around when we have ideas? So somebody's writing a book, and potentially somebody listening or watching this now, they might be in the throes of they're putting a book together and they've got lots of ideas that they're putting down on paper or in a document somewhere. How do you get to the point where you know what to keep and what not to keep?
It's a constant process also. And I think it's that constant process of you're not going to know everything at once that I think makes it difficult for people, because that's not the world we live in. You go to the bank, there's a specific process, that's how you do it. You have a job, there's a process, and everything is the way it is. Whereas this is about playing and possibility and what's going to happen. And over the course of writing a book or an article or anything you write, you know, you start off with everything as a possibility, and slowly but surely over the course of it, you realize what you're not going to keep and what you will keep. So early on, so what I would say is, you know, for you or for anybody who they have an idea for a book, what I'm going to recommend is, I call it like the most powerful writing exercise ever, and it's something I use all the time. When I'm at a place where I have no idea what's coming next, I have an idea, I have an idea, I have a kernel of an idea, and then you take that and you write about it. But what the key to writing about it is that I recommend pen and paper, because it changes there's a lot of unconscious process when you write by hand. But if writing, I actually, I mean, I say that, but I usually write on my computer because I can write faster. I can type faster than I can write by hand.
Probably paper and pen might
So
work for me.
either way works. Either way works. I mean, you can also speak it into a recorder.
Yeah.
You know, and then you can write it down. You can type it down, type it out after that. But what the key to it is, you say, all right, 10 minutes. You set a timer for 10 minutes, and then you write without stopping.
Okay.
No editing, no crossing anything out. You know, stop to think for a second here or there, but don't try to craft anything. Just literally let it pour out. And then you'll have 10 minutes of that, you know, and often maybe you'll go longer, maybe not, but just 10 minutes, just keep going. And again, the only rule is don't erase, don't edit, don't cross anything out.
Okay.
And then you take what you have and you read it, and you don't make any changes to it. And what you'll notice is when you read it, when you say, you know, what do you keep and what do you not keep? So even in that really, really raw phase, you take a look at it and you read through it, and you'll read through it and most likely you won't even remember writing everything you wrote.
Yeah.
And as you're reading it, you're going to feel this kind of like, oh, like you'll even potentially feel yourself sitting up a little straighter, moving in a little more. And those are the pieces, like you will instinctively know what the core and what the important parts are. So let's say you write for 10 minutes and there's one sentence that strikes you. That's okay. You can throw away the rest if you need to. Put it aside, do whatever you want, and just focus on the part that interests you.
Okay. That's an amazing tip. I like that intensity of 10 minutes, crush it, see what you got, do that as repetition. So I found the title, if you want me to give you a title.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then I'm keen to hear about your community and of course your book. So a title that I found in my phone is Fail Like You Love It. So that came to me and I put it in my phone, and like a lot of things that I do with that, it could be there for years and nothing ever may happen with it. And I think with just to labor on a point that I mentioned earlier, because I don't consider myself an author and because it's potentially not something that's front of mind for me, and maybe one of the reasons it's not front of mind for me is because it seems so mammoth. So the idea of bringing it into play, yeah, would feel quite daunting. So I keep it that, so it's just it exists in my phone.
And I think that's very common. I think that's a very common thing to do, because it's like, well, I mean, that's a great title. Fail Like You Love It, My Perfect Failure. Both of them automatically bring up these feelings that I think most of us connect to. Anybody who is in a creative field or wants to be in a creative field, we get that, you know, or who lives in this world and is, you know, like a 10-year-old in school already is worried about failure, especially in the US, less so here because they don't, they handle things, education is a little different here. Carol Dweck actually talks about that in her book.
Mindset.
Yes, her book Mindset, exactly, where she talks about the power of yet. And when you have a mindset of, oh, you know, when the mindset is one of failure, as if failure is a measure of anything, how do you move forward with that? Whereas if your mindset is, let's see where this goes, let's see what happens, because we don't know what's going to go on down the road, anything could happen, that allows you to move forward. And I think that's a great mindset for doing most things. I mean, but I would say also the fact that you started a podcast, you know, for me, the idea of starting a podcast, it's like, okay, well, there's lots of ideas and there's lots of things. And what about the technology and and the next thing you know, there's a million things that you're thinking of that are, you know, flying around in your head. And well, where do you start with that mess? And I think, like, for me, where I start every single book is free writing, like that exercise that I told you about.
I love that.
When I'm stuck in the middle of a book, I'm on the 4th draft of a book right now. And I've had to go back and I'm realizing, oh, wait, I'm not you know, I need something else here. I'm like, well, what do I put there? I don't know. Because, you know, the structure of the book seems already set, but I know I need something else. I do it again. I sit down and I just dump it on the page.
Yeah.
You know, and I use that process in so many different ways throughout every stage of writing a book, from the beginning, from writing the first draft to creating an outline. You know, and even an outline, I think we see outlines and they're supposed to be perfect.
Yeah.
And the idea that you write an outline and then like, but maybe you're going to change your outline. Maybe you're going to find something later that you'll need to change it. And giving yourself permission to not be perfect, to not always do it the right way, because there isn't a right way. I mean, you say perfect failure, but you know, perfection doesn't
Yeah,
exist.
exactly. It's kind of like a paradox because
Exactly.
perfect is doesn't exist. It's not a helpful word. It judges us as well unnecessarily, and we judge ourselves, and also
Mhm.
we potentially allow other people to judge us. And perfect is, I think I forget who said it, but it's the enemy of getting things done, and it just had so many restrictive elements to it. So yeah, so so this is a fascinating subject, by the way. It just brings up so many different questions in my head, but I definitely want to tackle or understand about the community that you created.
So basically the core of the entire community is all about allowing everybody to figure out what it is that they want and figure out their path to get there, and then have the support to do that. And sometimes support is, oh, okay, I know that I want to become an expert in parenting. I want to be known and writing on topics of parenting, just as one example. I've never written before. I have no idea how to pitch. I don't know where to write. I don't know what to say. I have a bunch of opinions, but I don't know what to do with them. Well, you can come to the community and share those ideas. And little by little, people who either have experience people who've already had similar experiences can give you tell you what they've done, or potentially give advice, or give you feedback on some ideas that you have. Or there's a whole set of resources where you can say, all right, I don't know how to pitch an article. Let me go and find out how to pitch an article, and I'll check
Okay.
out this workshop on pitching articles. And sometimes it's just as simple as accountability.
Yeah.
For me, accountability is a really big deal, because as long as you're moving forward and doing something, you're getting somewhere. It may not always feel like it. And I think the creative process is such that there's so much chaos in it. And like I said, chaos is actually a good thing. It just doesn't always feel good. Um, when you're in those chaotic parts, accountability is a really lovely structure to keep you moving forward.
Yeah.
So one of the things I do in the community is every Monday we check in, what are your plans for the week? And every Friday say, well, what are your celebrations for the week?
Okay. I love that
Not what did you
celebration.
accomplish?
Yeah.
Not what did you accomplish? Because maybe you didn't accomplish anything specific, but there are always celebrations and there are always wins that you can find. And and Monday, I do it Monday and Friday just because that's a standard work week and I needed to pick
Yeah.
days for it. And it works for a lot of people, but it doesn't work for everybody. And, that process of being like, well, I only start my work, so let's say somebody is only able to work, they have a job, Monday through Friday. So the only times they're really writing are on Saturdays. So it doesn't make sense for them to post on Monday about what their plan is. And I think that ability to be like, all right, I know everybody else is doing it on Monday, but what works for me is to do it on Friday. And that's what I'm going to do it. I think that ability to figure out what works best for you
Yeah.
is key to the community,
Yeah.
because we have so many options and so many places to go. And we don't have to be beholden to the rules that somebody else
Mm.
sets or the structure somebody else sets. We need to know our own structures and
Mm.
how we work. And then the other part of the accountability is when you're constantly checking in with somebody, when you say, all right, this is my plan, this is what I want to create. And then every week you're saying, all right, this is what I did this week in order to create it, or I didn't do anything this
Yeah.
week in order to create it. That helps you continue to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
I'm
and
with you.
and as long as you're moving forward, as long as you're taking steps forward, it doesn't matter how big they are, as long as you're moving forward towards your goal, you will get there.
Yeah,
As long as you continue.
yeah, yeah. That's fascinating. So I'm just thinking, it's coming to my head. So the difference, the pressure of writing. There's pressure to write in anyway, I imagine.
Mhm.
I'm just thinking about the comparative between writing when you're just starting out and you're writing, but then when it becomes maybe your business and you've got to write, like you write your own books and also you write as a career. So you're writing for publications and so forth. And if there's a different, if you have a different process for each, if there's a different type of pressure for each, but what does that look like?
Okay, so it really depends on, I mean, in a lot of ways, the pressure that you're talking about is monetary pressure when it becomes your career.
Yeah,
So there are a lot of different ways to kind of ease that pressure. So if we all need to pay our bills,
mm,
and that's a given, and that's a pressure. No matter what you do, we're facing that. But so for example, writing books has a much longer timeline. It takes longer to write them than an article. There's no guarantee if you write a book, if it's your first book or whatever book, and you don't have an agent, you don't have a publisher, there's no guarantees. So I think for books, and because it's such a long process, some people can write books in a month. I'm not one of those people, and I don't know that many people who can.
yeah,
But for me, writing books is about enjoying the process and the unfolding. And I will write it as I can. And I will give myself months, like this month for me is I'm finishing in my edits on my fourth draft because I want to send it to agents
mhm,
next month or March. And this type of time of year is a great time to send to agents because they've just had a break. So, but the actual process of writing, I really enjoy it. And I've worked really hard to enjoy it. And the resistance that we so often face when we sit down to write is that kind of, am I good enough? Is this anybody going to read this? Will I be able to publish? Da, 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 da. And that's just noise. And I would say when it comes to writing books, try to remove yourself from that as much as possible. And that takes time, and
mm,
it takes continually coming back to the page and writing it so that the subject is what's pulling you forward,
yeah,
and not the how much money am I going to make.
mm,
Whereas something like writing articles, that is something, it's a much shorter
yeah,
timeline. You can make money a lot faster with it, and you are writing more for somebody else than yourself. So if I want to pitch Wired, I have to know Wired or whatever magazine it is. You have to know what the magazine is. You have to know who to pitch. Have to know
mm,
basically how to pitch. And different magazines and different editors will work differently. So it's more about fitting it into what they're doing so that you're writing an article that works for you. But I would even say, like for me, the articles I write what's important to me. I write things that fit into my bigger picture. So when
yeah,
I have on my writing plan, on my writing roadmap, I have a marketing section, and writing articles fits into more than one section, but it very much fits into the marketing because that's what I'm getting out there. But then see myself as a brand. What are the things that I write about? I write about writing, I write about parenting, I write about travel, so that I'm writing about things that I enjoy writing
okay,
about,
yeah,
but then I'm conforming them to the needs of the paper or the magazine publication that I'm writing
okay,
for.
okay. So, massively appreciated.
Thank
And
you.
you're very welcome. You're very welcome. And if you listen to this or watching this on YouTube, please do subscribe because it definitely does help the channel. We're keen to grow and to attract more wonderful viewers. So, and also, we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of My Perfect Failure. And if you know anybody that is a budding writer that is keen to develop and grow their writing skills and repertoire, please do share this episode. And your feedback is most welcome. So we're keen to hear about the things you like and equally the things you don't like. So you can find me at paul@myperfectfailure.com, or you can find me via the website, via the contact page. So take care for now. Bye.
Thanks for listening to My Perfect Failure podcast. Be sure to visit www.myperfectfailure.com to join the conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Google Play. Look out for our next episode.